Rogue Labyrinth is a top-down, Zelda-style roguelike action RPG. It offers a mix of old-school action-adventure gameplay with mini-games and modern roguelike design. Lantanis is a small bucolic kingdom which has become the prize in the world's largest game show. The billionaire media tycoon Echelon seized control of Lantanis to serve as the site for the Rogue Labyrinth, his competition grounds, with the kingdom's throne serving as the reward for competition. Iris is an aspiring leaf guardian whose journey to the sacred trees of Lantanis has been obstructed by Echelon's labyrinth. Achieving their goal will require entering the labyrinth, defeating competitors from other kingdoms, and claiming the grand prize. The basic gameplay loop involves entering an arena, fighting off a number of waves of enemies, claiming a reward, and then moving on until reaching a boss. Iris has several available offensive options. Besides the obligatory melee weapon, the player will also gain a customizable magic attack, a super attack that operates off a separate gauge, and secondary weapons from other competitors. With a variety of possible upgrades, it's possible to design a build around any of these. However, the most distinctive mode of attack in Rogue Labyrinth is deflection and bouncing. The player's melee attack can send an enemy projectile back at them, or send inanimate objects and downed enemies flying around the screen. Iris's magic attack also bounces off of walls, and after a minute of combat, an arena can turn into a wild flurry of bouncing objects. In some games this is just a side effect, but it's quite central to Rogue Labyrinth, especially with a build designed to increase the power of bouncing objects. One welcome addition to the roguelike formula is the presence of minigames. Question mark squares often contain minigames which are a mix of common bonus games, arcade throwbacks, and references to real-world game shows. Memory, Plinko, Whack-A-Mole, and Breakout are among the games available. While the core mechanics are modern, Rogue Labyrinth has a distinctly retro feel to it, one that extends beyond its Game Boy Advance aesthetic. The controls and movement have a similar early 2000s feel, and while anyone can get into the swing of things, the game is bound to feel familiar to anyone who remembers this era. Overall, Rogue Labyrinth is a solid throwback action game that offers more flexibility in its gameplay than you might be expecting. Katanaut is a roguelike action platformer with a focus on fast, visceral combat. It's a game for people comfortable with making quick, moment-to-moment decisions. Somewhere on the edge of the known universe, a lone research station is in the middle of a terrifying crisis. A mysterious alien force is transforming the crew into deformed, violent horrors. Nott, a specialist in handling dangerous scenarios, has been tasked with infiltrating the station, clearing out the threat, and determining the source. Assisting in this task is bizarre time-bending technology that can wrench him back from the brink of oblivion, and he'll need it, because death is the one thing that's certain. Katanaut sends the player through a series of regular levels and boss fights with upgrade rooms in between. The levels always come in the same order, though the standard areas are procedurally generated. Roguelike elements can be an uneasy fit with platformers, but aside from the occasional oddball layout, the approach works quite well here. The focus is more on combat than exploration, and the watchword here is speed. Nott always has a main weapon and an offhand weapon, usually a gun, though secondary blades and defensive devices are also options. Nott can also gain up to 2 special abilities on cooldown timers. The offhand weapon runs off an ammo meter that is replenished by landing hits in melee, lending the gameplay to a shoot-and-strike rhythm. There are a few approaches to combat depending in part on the player's choice of main weapon. Initially, Nott can choose from a long blade that lends itself to a more focused, parry-based combat style, or a lighter blade that's built more for dodging and quick attacks. Regardless of the player's armament or build, combat in Katanaut is lightning fast, tapping into instinct over careful strategy. It begins as a simple button masher, but enemy patterns soon grow more complex, and Nott's limited life demands good judgment on the player's part. Overall, Katanaut is a deceptively challenging game that might appeal more to hardcore action fans than the usual platformer audience. Fresh Tracks is a rhythm action game with roguelike elements. It's a strange twist on some well-trod ground, but one that's greatly appreciated and ideal for newcomers. Norwyn is a land of music and adventure, with its legendary history captured in the story songs of the divine beings known as mythics. At least this was true. Since Norwyn was conquered by Mar, the mythic queen of terror, the songs have faded and lost their power. You are a lone warrior on an impossible quest to overthrow Mar. Your only hope is to rally the aid of the other mythics, and restore the power of Norwyn's music. Hard as it may be to believe at first glance, Fresh Tracks is a rhythm game. The player rides through each level on skis, dodging or destroying obstacles and fighting off enemies while collecting pickups used for short and long-term upgrades. Everything is set to the beat of the music, with the player gaining bonuses for perfectly timed strikes and dodges. There's plenty of variety in the soundtrack, which shifts between electronic, metal, and orchestral tracks over the course of the game. The core gameplay is very arcade-like, requiring a combination of quick reflexes and fast judgment. Experience with rhythm games helps for the former, but even masters of the genre will need to adapt their skills. Fans of reflex-focused action games will probably have an easier time getting the hang of it, and Fresh Tracks could be seen as something of a gateway for rhythm games. Fresh Tracks has some light roguelike elements in its layout. The long-term goal is to reach a series of boss areas, more difficult levels with much longer songs. In between bosses, the player has a randomized selection of levels with different difficulty levels and different bonuses. The main effect of the roguelike elements is to allow the player to set the challenge level. Fresh Tracks can be a hard game, but there are many options to adjust the difficulty up or down. Aside from offering levels at varying difficulties, the player's choice of Mythic, the divine storyteller that accompanies them, also affects the challenge. Mythics earned later in the game will modify earlier levels to make them harder, offering unlockable items as a reward. Overall, Fresh Tracks is a captivating game that does just about everything well. As someone who's never been big on rhythm games but has played a lot of the more recent crop of music-oriented action games, this is a great entry point for anyone who's curious about this new generation of rhythm titles. Kickback is a shoot-'em-up with roguelike elements and a novel means of movement. While it's not the easiest game to get a handle on, it's an interesting challenge for experienced fans of the style. The player controls a damaged ship that only possesses the use of its armaments, and as such, the only way to move is via the recoil from the ship's weapons. The ship comes equipped with 2 weapons based on the pilot, at least one of which is used primarily as a mode of movement. This means that, unlike a typical twin-stick shooter, it's not possible to move and fire in different directions without some tricky maneuvers. The player will quickly unlock other ships that feature more conventional movement schemes, though they all have their own gimmicks. After picking a ship and pilot, the player is dropped into one of 3 arenas. All 3 are open spaces with damage areas in the corners to prevent the player from getting too comfortable, but the size of each arena and the enemies that appear differ greatly. The objective is to survive against waves of enemies for an amount of time based on the difficulty level at which point a boss spawns in. Defeating enemies and collecting dropped items powers up the player's ship. At set levels, the player will gain either a bonus to 1 of 5 fixed stats, a choice of a random upgrade that can be equipped to either of the ship's weapons or the hull, or an active ability on a cooldown. Each ship also levels up between runs, unlocking new pilots and weapons. Kickback has a definite learning curve. With the default ship, it can take a while to really get a handle on tight maneuvers, which becomes an issue when facing enemies that flood the screen with projectiles or larger enemies that are harder to dodge. On the other hand, the ship is durable and packs a punch, which really levels the playing field. There's also a lot of variety in the enemies, and few of them feel overpowered or frustrating to fight. Overall, Kickback can definitely take some getting used to, but a shoot-'em-up fan willing to spend an hour or so getting a handle on it will probably find something to like. Bygone Dreams is a high-fantasy action RPG. It's a well-made example of the subgenre, though without anything too groundbreaking. A young warrior named Va awakens to the sight of Ilona, the prime deity of his realm. In the last moments before she fades from view, she tells him that their world, the dream realm of Lune, is being threatened by a new nightmare, and Va is their last chance to stop it. His task is to track down the Guardians of Lune, but the world is already fracturing and none of the Guardians are quite themselves. One way or another, Va will have to rally their support before Lune is swallowed by the darkness. The core mechanics of Bygone Dreams should be familiar to fans of the subgenre. Combat built around combinations of light and heavy attacks, with defense tied to either parries or dodges depending on player preference. Va quickly finds a bow for ranged combat, and he also acquires one-shot items and magic for additional effects, but most combat is still hand-to-hand. Melee combat is less forgiving here than in some comparable games. Va has access to a range of weapons that feel very different to use, but all of them have a lot of momentum, so combat will feel a little slower than you might be used to. VA is also limited by a stamina meter that drains quickly when using melee combos and dodges. This means that some cheaper tactics aren't so viable, and combined with the slower pace of attacks, requires every blow to count. Add in the hard-hitting enemies and you have a game that's highly challenging, though veterans of the Souls games will be able to adapt without too much of a problem. The aesthetic design of Bygone Dreams is particularly noteworthy. Each area has a distinctive feel to it, with some highly original theming and a lot of detail. The music fits nicely with the visuals, and the game just punches well above its weight in terms of its presentation. Overall, Bygone Dreams is an attractive, if somewhat standard, addition to the crowded action RPG market. It's a solid choice for anyone looking for something a little different than what you usually get from AAA companies.